because it was an experience that I've never experienced in a film before, that was like a family, and everybody did become very tight.
In 1955, a 17-year-old kid from the Bronx stood opposite James Dean in a film that would define teenage rebellion for generations. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination and made him one of the hottest young stars in Hollywood. 4 years later, he was still one of the top 5 box office draws in America. By the early 1960s, nobody wanted to hire him. Tonight, we're looking at Sal Mineo, who was supposed to be a superstar, until Hollywood pulled the plug. The Bronx Kid. Salvatore Mineo Jr. was born on January 10, 1939, in Harlem, New York. Though he grew up in the Bronx, his parents, Salvatore Sr. and Josephine, were Sicilian immigrants. His father worked as a coffin maker, crafting caskets in a workshop that smelled of wood and varnish. Sal had 3 siblings: Michael, Victor, and Serena. The Mineo household wasn't producing future Broadway stars. By age 8, Sal was running with a street gang in one of the toughest neighborhoods in the Bronx. The kids he hung out with stole cars, got into fights, did whatever they needed to survive on those rough streets. He got thrown out of parochial school for causing too much trouble. At 10 years old, he was arrested for robbery. The police gave Josephine Mineo 2 options for her son: send him to juvenile detention or find another path. His mother gave him a choice: juvenile detention or acting school. Josephine Mineo had noticed something in her son despite all the trouble. She'd seen him performing for neighborhood kids, doing impressions, making people laugh. He had energy, presence, a way of commanding attention that could be dangerous on the streets, but might be valuable on a stage. A talent scout had mentioned that the boy had something special, so she enrolled him in dancing and acting classes at the professional children's school, using money the family could barely afford. It worked. At age 11, Sal landed a role in Tennessee Williams' Broadway production of The Rose Tattoo in 1951, starring alongside Maureen Stapleton and Eli Wallach. He played a small part, but he was reliable, professional, and completely natural on stage. The play ran for nearly 1,000 performances, and young Sal never missed a show. Then came The King and I in 1952. Sal played the young crown prince opposite Yul Brynner and Gertrude Lawrence in what would become one of the most successful Broadway musicals of the decade. The role required him to sing, dance, and hold his own against 2 theatrical legends. At 13 years old, he managed it. Brynner took a liking to the kid and became a mentor, teaching him how to handle himself like a professional actor, how to prepare for a role, how to take direction, how to deal with the pressures of performing 8 shows a week. The show ran for 3 years, over 1,200 performances. Sal Mineo, the street kid who'd been stealing cars at age 9, was now a legitimate Broadway performer with discipline and training that most adult actors never received. Breaking into film. By 1954, Mineo was appearing on television and auditioning for film roles. He beat out Clint Eastwood for a part in 6 Bridges to Cross in 1955, playing the young version of Tony Curtis's character. The same year, he appeared in The Private War of Major Benson with Charlton Heston. These were solid roles, but nothing special. Then director Nicholas Ray cast him in Rebel Without a Cause, and everything changed. The role was John Plato Crawford, a troubled 15-year-old from a broken home who desperately seeks connection with Jim Stark.
Though he starred in only 3 films in the 1950s, James Dean remains a Hollywood legend.
Played by James Dean, Plato was vulnerable, lonely, and filled with a yearning that read as something more than friendship. Film historians would later call Plato American film's first gay teenager, though the word was never spoken in 1955. The script didn't explicitly say Plato was gay, but everything about the character suggested it. The way he looked at Jim, the way he clung to any scrap of attention or affection, the shrine to movie stars he kept in his locker, the complete absence of any interest in girls. In 1955, Hollywood, you couldn't say it outright, but you could show it, and Mineo showed it. Mineo brought everything from his Bronx childhood to that performance. The loneliness, the need to belong, the hunger for someone to see him as worthwhile. He understood Plato completely because he'd lived pieces of that life. The fear of being different, the desperate need to connect with someone, anyone, who might understand. His chemistry with James Dean was electric and tragic. Dean was the cool rebel Plato could never be. Natalie Wood's Judy was the girl who saw past Plato's awkwardness to the decent kid underneath. The 3 of them formed a makeshift family in the film, broken kids finding each other in a world that didn't want them. The film opened in October 1955, 1 month after James Dean died in a car crash at age 24. The tragedy amplified everything about Rebel Without a Cause. This wasn't just a movie about alienated teenagers. It was James Dean's last completed performance, and audiences poured into theaters to see him one final time. Rebel Without a Cause became a cultural phenomenon. Teenagers saw themselves in these characters in a way they'd never seen themselves represented on screen before. Parents dragged their kids to see it, hoping to understand why their children were so angry and confused. Critics recognized it as something new and important. All three principal actors, Dean, Natalie Wood, and Mineo, received massive attention. At 17 years old, Sal Mineo was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, making him the 5th youngest nominee in that category in Oscar history. Teenage girls went crazy for him. Magazines put his face on every cover. He received thousands of letters from young female fans every week. When he made public appearances, crowds mobbed him. His biographer Paul Jeffers later wrote that Mineo dated the most beautiful women in Hollywood and New York City, and the press covered every romance breathlessly. His agent was fielding movie offers faster than they could count them. Bob Hope made a joke on television in 1957 that all the public schools in the Bronx would be closed the next day for Sal Mineo's birthday. Hope meant it as a joke, a friendly poke at the young star's popularity. Hundreds of Bronx kids stayed home from school anyway, taking Hope's announcement seriously. The absenteeism was so bad that Hope had to issue a public retraction, urging students to stay in school. Sal Mineo, the kid from the Bronx who'd been arrested at 10, was now one of the biggest stars in America. The Switchblade Kid. Hollywood immediately typecast him. In 1956, he appeared in Crime in the Streets as a violent juvenile delinquent named Frankie Dane, the leader of a street gang planning to murder a neighbor. The role earned him the nickname the Switchblade Kid, which stuck for years. The character was Play-Doh turned inside out, still vulnerable and damaged underneath, but expressing it through violence instead of neediness. He played troubled teens in Somebody Up There Likes Me alongside Paul Newman, a biopic about boxer Rocky Graziano. Then came Giant, reuniting him with James Dean in what would be Dean's final film. Mineo played Angel Obregon II, a Mexican-American boy who goes off to World War II and gets killed. It was a small role in a massive epic, but he made it count. The roles kept coming, one after another. Dino in 1957, where he played Surprise, a troubled teenager with violent tendencies trying to escape his criminal past. The Young Don't Cry, also in 1957, as another damaged young man. Tonka in 1958, where Disney cast him as a young Sioux brave named White Bull, who tames a wild horse that becomes the famous Comanche, the only survivor of Custer's last stand. The Gene Krupa story in 1959 gave him the title role, playing the legendary jazz drummer. Mineo learned to play drums for the part, practicing for hours every day until he could convincingly mime Krupa's technique while Krupa's actual drumming played on the soundtrack. It was one of his best performances, showing he could carry a film on his own. These weren't bad films. Mineo was genuinely talented, bringing depth and vulnerability to characters that could have been one-dimensional. Critics consistently praised his work, but they were all variations on the same theme: the sensitive young man struggling against a world that didn't understand him. Between 1955 and 1960, Mineo appeared in 14 films. He was working constantly, commanding top salaries, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. For those 5 years, he was genuinely one of the biggest stars in the film industry. In 1957, Mineo even tried his hand at pop music. He released the single Start Movin' in My Direction.
There's a new version available of the film that made Sal Mineo a star. Last month, a newly restored and digitally mastered edition of Rebel Without a Cause was released on,
which stayed in the Billboard Top 40 for 13 weeks and peaked at number 9. His follow-up single Lasting Love hit number 27. His album sold over 1 million copies. The kid could do it all: act, sing, perform on stage, carry films. He was the total package. Then came Exodus in 1960. Mineo played Dov Landau, a young Jewish Holocaust survivor and resistance fighter determined to help establish the State of Israel. It was a meaty, complex role in a major Otto Preminger epic, with a budget of $4 million and a cast that included Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. The film was nearly 4 hours long, an ambitious historical drama about the founding of Israel. Mineo threw himself into the part, delivering what many critics considered the best performance of his career. Dov Landau wasn't just another troubled teen. He was a survivor of Nazi death camps, a young man who'd seen horrors that aged him beyond his years, who channeled his trauma into fierce determination to fight for a Jewish homeland. The role showed Mineo could handle serious, complex, adult material. He wasn't just a teen idol playing variations on the same character, he was an actor with real range and depth. He won the Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actor. He received his second Academy Award nomination at age 21. Everything looked perfect. Sal Mineo had just proven to Hollywood that he could transition from teen idol to serious adult actor. This should have been the moment when the industry opened up for him, when producers started seeing him as a leading man instead of yesterday's troubled teenager. Instead, everything fell apart. The decline. The offers stopped coming. Mineo himself couldn't understand what happened. One day he was fielding multiple film offers, choosing between projects, negotiating salaries. The next, his phone wasn't ringing. His agent had nothing for him. Casting directors who'd been calling constantly just a year before weren't returning calls. Years later, he told a columnist, "It's a situation I've never been able to fathom. One minute it seemed I had more movie offers than I could handle, the next, no one wanted me." Several factors worked against him, all hitting at once. First, he was aging out of the troubled teen roles that had made him famous. By the early 1960s, Mineo was in his mid-20s, too old to play the sensitive juvenile delinquent, but not established enough to transition smoothly into adult leading man territory. Hollywood had a very narrow window for actors who'd made their names as teenagers. You either successfully transitioned to adult roles immediately, or the industry moved on without you. Second, his Sicilian features and dark complexion led to him being offered mostly ethnic roles when he got offers at all. Hollywood in the 1960s had a narrow view of what roles Italian-American actors could play. They could be criminals, victims, comic relief, or supporting characters, but rarely romantic leads or heroes. Producers suggested he change his name to something less Italian, like Sal Maynard. The suggestion infuriated him. He refused, proudly keeping his family name. His mother supported the decision completely, but it limited his options even further. Third, and perhaps most damaging, rumors about his homosexuality began circulating in Hollywood. In the early 1960s, this was career poison. Studios considered him inappropriate for leading roles. The rumors were based partly on truth. Mineo was bisexual, though he hadn't publicly confirmed it yet, and partly on the perception of his Plato character in Rebel Without a Cause. He auditioned for a major part in David Lean's Lawrence of Arabia in 1962, but wasn't hired. Mineo later said he believed he lost the role because he'd appeared in Exodus, a pro-Israel film, and Lawrence was shooting in Jordan. Arab countries wouldn't have welcomed an actor associated with Israel, but industry insiders suggest his was the real reason he didn't get the part. The film's salary that had peaked at $25,000 per film in the late 1950s, a fortune when the average American made $4,000 a year, dropped to $10,000 or $15,000 by the mid-1960s, and he was working far less frequently. Sometimes months went by without any offers at all.
And we started talking. There was a bond. There was an emotional bond and need that up to then had not been tapped.
The roles he did get were increasingly minor. In The Longest Day in 1962, a massive World War II epic with an all-star cast including John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, and Sean Connery, Mineo played a private who gets killed shortly after landing in France. He had maybe 5 minutes of screen time in a nearly 3-hour film. You barely notice him among the dozens of major stars. In 1964, he appeared in John Ford's final Western Cheyenne Autumn, playing a Native American character named Red Shirt, another small part in another big ensemble, lost among established stars like Richard Widmark, Carol Baker, and Carl Malden. That same year, he starred in Who Killed Teddy Bear, a low-budget thriller where he played a disturbed stalker named Lawrence Sherman, who works in a disco and obsesses over a woman played by Juliette Prowse. His performance was actually excellent, dark, unsettling, completely committed. Critics praised him for taking risks and showing range beyond his teen idol image, but the film typecast him all over again, this time as deranged criminals instead of troubled teens. He'd escaped one box only to fall into another. Instead of opening doors, Who Killed Teddy Bear closed them. Casting directors saw him as creepy, unstable, dangerous, not leading man material. In 1965, he had a small role as Uriah in The Greatest Story Ever Told, the biblical epic about Jesus Christ, lost among another all-star cast including Max von Sydow, Charlton Heston, Telly Savalas, and Sidney Poitier. gay. His film career was essentially over. Between 1965 and his death in 1976, he would appear in only one more movie, Escape from the Planet of the Apes in 1971, buried under ape makeup, completely unrecognizable. At 26 years old, Sal Mineo was washed up in Hollywood, fighting back. Mineo didn't give up. He couldn't afford to give up. He still had bills to pay, an apartment to maintain, a life to live. If Hollywood didn't want him anymore, he'd create his own opportunities. He returned to where he'd started, the stage. In 1969, he directed a Los Angeles production of Fortune and Men's Eyes, a Canadian play about life in prison with explicit gay themes. The play, written by John Herbert, was controversial even off-Broadway. It dealt frankly with homosexuality and the power dynamics among inmates in ways that made audiences uncomfortable. Mineo himself played the role of Rocky, a hardened convict who dominates the other prisoners through intimidation and violence. The play featured an unknown 18-year-old actor named Don Johnson as Smitty, a young first-time offender who becomes a victim of the prison system. The production generated immediate controversy. Mineo expanded the scene beyond what the script specified, adding explicit staging that critics called excessive and gratuitous. Some reviewers walked out. Others praised the unflinching portrayal of prison brutality, but the performance aspects received strong reviews. Mineo's direction was confident and bold. His own acting showed a darkness and intensity that his teen idol roles had never allowed. For the first time in years, people were talking about Sal Mineo as an artist rather than as yesterday's teen idol or as a cautionary tale about the dangers of being typecast. Getting the rights to the play had taken the last of Mineo's dwindling money. His finances, which had been substantial in the late 1950s, had evaporated through a combination of his mother's management during his peak years, investments in projects that lost money, and the simple fact that he hadn't worked regularly in nearly a decade. One account claimed he could only afford the Fortune and Men's Eyes rights after a lucky winning streak in Las Vegas, but he believed in the project enough to risk everything. The play ran successfully in both New York and Los Angeles. It didn't revive his film career. Producers weren't suddenly calling with movie offers, but it established him as a serious director willing to tackle controversial material at a time when most artists played it safe. During this period, Mineo became increasingly open about his bisexuality, though he was careful never to make a formal public announcement. He understood that confirming the rumors would end any remaining chance of mainstream film roles, but he also refused to hide who he was or lie about his relationships. In a 1972 interview with entertainment journalist Bose Hadley, who was conducting interviews with gay and Hollywood figures for a book, Mineo confirmed what Hollywood had whispered about for years. He spoke candidly about the industry's discrimination, about his struggles to find work, about his hope that as he got older, the range of roles available to him would expand. He'd had relationships with women, including a long engagement to actress Jill Haworth, whom he met on the set of Exodus in 1960. They portrayed young lovers in the film, and the on-screen chemistry carried over into real life. For years they were on and off, genuinely caring for each other. They were engaged to be married at one point. The engagement ended when Haworth discovered him with a man. According to Mineo's biographer Michael Gregg Michaud, she canceled the wedding after catching him in a relationship with another man. It broke her heart, but they remained close friends for the rest of his life. She never spoke badly of him publicly. He'd also had relationships with several prominent men in Hollywood, though the names stayed private during his lifetime. Rumors connected him to James Dean, though whether their relationship or just a deep friendship remains disputed. Other relationships were more clearly documented, though discretion was essential in an era when such relationships could destroy careers. At the time of his death, he was in a 6-year relationship with actor and acting coach Courtney Burr III, the longest and most stable relationship of his life. They'd met during the Fortune and Men's Eyes production, where Burr worked alongside Mineo. It was a genuine partnership, domestic and committed in ways Mineo's earlier relationships had never been. Mineo was one of the first major Hollywood actors to be openly at a time when it could destroy careers. It almost certainly did destroy his, but he refused to hide who he was, refused to enter into a fake marriage for appearances, refused to lie. That integrity cost him roles, cost him money, cost him the career he'd worked so hard to build, but it let him look at himself in the mirror. Television and survival. Through the 1970s, Mineo survived on television work, guest appearances on Combat, where he played a G.I. wanted for murder in multiple episodes, a role in the TV movie The Family Rico in 1972, playing opposite Ben Gazzara, episodes of Columbo, where he appeared in A Case of Immunity in 1975 as the assistant to a murderous consular official played by Hector Elizondo, an appearance on SWAT where he played a cult leader similar to Charles Manson, guest spots on Harry O and Hawaii Five-0. These weren't starring roles. These were one-episode guest spots, the kind of work actors take when the phone stops ringing for anything better. A week or two of work, a paycheck, then waiting for the next call. Mineo considered television inferior to film and theater, a kiddie version of real entertainment, but it paid the bills when nothing else did. The work was steady enough to survive on, but not enough to rebuild his career or his finances. He wasn't getting rich, he was getting by. For someone who'd been one of the top 5 box office draws in America 15 years earlier, it was a humbling existence. His last film role came in 1971, Escape from the Planet of the Apes, the third movie in the Planet of the Apes series. He played Dr. Milo, a chimpanzee scientist, completely buried under ape makeup that took hours to apply. Nobody watching the movie would have recognized the teen idol from Rebel Without a Cause. Mineo took the job because he needed the money. It was work, and work was work. By the mid-1970s, his financial situation had become genuinely difficult. The money from his peak years in the 1950s was long gone. He'd invested in theater productions that lost money. His mother had acted as his manager and spent freely from his earnings during the good years, believing the success would never end. His refusal to compromise his integrity by taking commercial roles or hiding his sexuality had cost him dearly in an industry that demanded conformity. At the time of his death, his estate was worth approximately $200,000, about $1 million in today's money. For someone who'd been a top 5 box office draw, who'd commanded peak salaries of $25,000 per film, when the average American made $4,000 a year, it was a modest amount. The money had slipped away through a combination of poor management, bad investments, long periods without work, and the simple fact that Hollywood had thrown him away while he was still young enough to need decades more income. The comeback. In 1975, Sal Mineo's luck finally seemed to be changing. He landed the lead role in a stage production of P.S. Your Cat is Dead, a black comedy by James Kirkwood about a failed actor whose life falls apart on New Year's Eve. Mineo played Vito, a bisexual burglar who gets caught in the apartment and ends up tied to a bed for most of the play. The production opened in San Francisco and became a hit. Critics praised Mineo's performance. Audiences loved him. After years of struggling, he was finally getting attention for the right reasons again. The success in San Francisco led to a Los Angeles run. In early 1976, Mineo moved to West Hollywood to continue the show at the Westwood Playhouse, with Keir Dullea set to join the production. Friends noticed that Mineo seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. At 37 years old, he believed he was finally breaking free from the typecasting that had strangled his career. He talked about directing films, about new projects, about a future that looked bright again. February 12th, 1976. On the evening of Thursday, February 12th, 1976, Sal Mineo finished rehearsal for P.S. Your Cat is Dead around 9:30 p.m. He drove home to his apartment at 8563 Holloway Drive in West Hollywood, arriving around 10 p.m. He parked his car in the carport beneath his apartment building and started walking toward the stairs. A man came out of the shadows. 9-year-old Monica Marem was in her bedroom in a nearby building when she heard shouting. A neighbor, Ray Evans, ran outside and found Mineo lying on the ground in the parking alley, bleeding heavily from a wound in his chest. Evans tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Mineo managed to gasp a few words, but Evans couldn't make them out. Then Mineo stopped breathing. He'd been stabbed once through the heart with a heavy knife. The attack was so quick and brutal that Mineo barely had time to react. The killer ran down an alley and disappeared into the night. Police found Mineo's wallet still in his jacket, cash untouched. That confused investigators. If this was a robbery, why leave the money? Paramedics pronounced Sal Mineo dead at the scene at 9:55 p.m. He was 37 years old. The investigation. The case immediately went cold. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a white man with long blonde hair running from the scene. Police initially suspected the murder might be connected to Mineo's work with prison reform programs, perhaps an ex-convict with a grudge. Then they shifted focus to his personal life after discovering his apartment filled with photographs of nude men. For 2 years, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had no viable suspects. Then, in 1977, Michigan police arrested a man named Lionel Ray Williams on bad check charges. Williams, who had a substantial criminal record, was overheard in jail bragging to other inmates that he'd killed Sal Mineo. Michigan authorities contacted Los Angeles. Detectives flew to Michigan to interview Williams. Williams initially denied everything. Then he told detectives he'd heard from someone else that Mineo was killed in a drug deal gone wrong. But his stories kept changing, and detectives noticed he seemed to know details about the murder scene that hadn't been released to the public. In May 1977, Williams' wife Teresa contacted detectives. She told them that on the night of February 12, 1976, her husband came home covered in blood. He told her he'd stabbed a man. When he saw a news report about Mineo's death the next day, he said, "That's the dude I killed." But there was a problem. Every witness had described the killer as a white man with long straight hair. Lionel Ray Williams was a young black man with an afro. Then police found an old photograph of Williams from early 1976. In the photo, his hair was chemically straightened and dyed brown, hanging down past his shoulders. Williams was light-skinned, and in dim light, at a distance, he could potentially be mistaken for white. Records showed that Williams had been loaned a yellow Dodge Colt from a car dealership on February 12, 1976. Witnesses had reported seeing a yellow car near the murder scene. More evidence came from corrections officers who'd heard Williams admit to stabbing Mineo while in jail. The medical examiner had made a cast of Mineo's knife wound, which matched the description of a knife Williams' wife said he owned. Williams also had a string of robbery convictions from the same time period as Mineo's murder, including one that occurred just 13 minutes after Mineo was stabbed, less than a mile away. The prosecution's theory: Williams had been hiding in the carport waiting to rob someone. When Mineo parked his car and got out, Williams approached him demanding money. Mineo shouted for help. Williams stabbed him to silence him, panicked, and ran without taking anything. The trial. In March 1979, Lionel Ray Williams went on trial for the murder of Sal Mineo and 10 counts of robbery. The trial was contentious. Williams maintained his innocence, claiming he didn't even know who Sal Mineo was. His defense attorney argued the eyewitness descriptions didn't match Williams. One witness, 9-year-old Monica Marem, who was now 12, stuck to her original testimony. She told the jury, "I noticed that he was very white because I could see the side of his face." But the prosecution had the confessions Williams made to other inmates, his wife's testimony about him coming home covered in blood, the car records, the knife wound match, and the pattern of robberies. The jury convicted Williams of second-degree murder for killing Sal Mineo and 10 counts of robbery. The judge sentenced him to 51 years in prison. Williams was paroled in 1990 after serving 12 years. He was soon sent back to prison for other crimes. As of 2024, he remained incarcerated. In recent years, Williams has sought exoneration, claiming he was wrongly convicted. A 2024 documentary called Unseen Innocence presents his case, arguing that evidence was overlooked and that racial bias affected the investigation. The case remains controversial, with some advocates believing Williams was innocent and others convinced the right man was convicted. The funeral. Sal Mineo's funeral was held at Holy Trinity Roman Catholic Church in Mamaroneck, New York. Dennis Hopper attended, so did DZ Arnaz and Paul Newman. Natalie Wood came to say goodbye to her Rebel Without a Cause co-star. 5 years later, Wood would die under mysterious circumstances, drowning off the coast of Catalina Island at age 43. James Dean had died in 1955 at age 24. Sal Mineo died in 1976 at age 37. Natalie Wood died in 1981 at age 43. All three principals of Rebel Without a Cause were gone before any of them reached 50. Some people called it the Rebel Curse. Mineo was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York, not far from where he grew up in the Bronx. What might have been? The tragedy of Sal Mineo wasn't just that he died young. It was that he died just as his career was turning around, just as he'd proven he could reinvent himself one more time. P.S. Your Cat is Dead had shown that audiences still responded to him when given the chance. The reviews were strong, the show had legs, producers were starting to take notice again. If he'd lived, Mineo might have followed the path that other typecast actors eventually found. Character roles, directing work, a career built on talent and persistence rather than teen idol looks. He might have become an important voice for gay and bisexual actors in Hollywood, speaking openly about his experiences at a time when the industry was beginning to change. He was already ahead of his time in his willingness to talk about his sexuality, but we'll never know. His story ended in a parking lot behind a West Hollywood apartment, killed by someone who probably didn't even recognize him. The legacy. Sal Mineo's career trajectory tells a story that Hollywood has repeated over and over. The young star who gets typecast, ages out of the roles that made him famous, struggles to find new footing, and eventually gets forgotten by an industry that prizes youth above all else. But his story has added dimensions that make it particularly heartbreaking. He was ethnically Italian at a time when Hollywood wanted leading men to look Anglo-Saxon. He was bisexual at a time when Hollywood demanded heterosexuality from its stars. He was an artist who wanted to grow and take risks at a time when the industry wanted him to stay safely in his box. He refused to change his name. He refused to hide his sexuality. He refused to take roles that compromised his integrity. Those refusals cost him his career, but they let him keep his dignity. His performances in Rebel Without a Cause and Exodus remain powerful more than 60 years later. Watch him in those films and you see genuine talent, not just teen idol charisma. He could have had a long, distinguished career if circumstances had been different. Film historian David Thompson wrote, "Mineo's career trajectory shows how Hollywood discarded actors who challenged conventional masculinity or whose image became too specific. That's probably the kindest way to put it. The less kind way is that Hollywood built him up, used him, typecast him, and threw him away when they were done with him. Sal Mineo was supposed to be a superstar. He had the talent, the looks, the drive, and the opportunity, but Hollywood pulled the plug long before he was ready to stop working. And then, just when he'd found a way to come back on his own terms, someone took everything away in a West Hollywood parking lot on a February night in 1976. If you enjoyed this look back at Sal Mineo's life and career, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you remember seeing his films when they first came out, or if you have thoughts about his legacy, leave us a comment below.